Let's talk about another leadership skill, a critical skill if you're leading teams and you want to help people move forward, whether it's inside your organization, outside of your organization, or in your family unit. Let's talk about design. What is design? Design is something, from my perspective, something that's done with intention. So design equals something with intention. Many of us have processes inside our organization that have happened organically, meaning they just kind of come together. One thing happens after another, and before you know it, you've got all these processes that ultimately help the business work or your family work, but they happen organically. There's another way to think about process. And what happens if you take, instead of looking at organic process that just kind of comes together, what if you take a view of design thinking and apply a system to it, something that you design backward and execute forward, which is another Covey thing. It's a lot of design thinking applied to leadership, both from a personal perspective and a team perspective. So if we say that we want to begin with the end in mind, so we have this endpoint, checkered flag that we're going to go through. We have this checkered flag that we're going to go to, this goal that we want to get to. And we know where we're starting. We have this starting point, this beginning point. How do we get from here to here? Well, let's work backward to each of the individual steps that happen just before we get to success. Think about what happens just before the end. What happens just before that? A good way to think about this that I think everybody has witnessed in one way, shape, or form is designing for going and picking up eggs at the grocery store. Now, you wouldn't think about it. You just do it. You get in the car, you turn the key on, you drive, or you push the button, you go into reverse, you drive. We don't put a lot of thought to what goes into that part of the process. What I'm going to challenge you to do is think about what would happen if you did put some thought into it. Before you get home with the eggs, you got to put the eggs in the car. So we got to be in the car. Now, before we could get the eggs in the car, we have to actually walk the eggs from the grocery store into the car, leave store. Before that happens, we have to buy the eggs. Before that happens, we have to get them in the store, put them in our basket. Before that happens, we have to get into the store. Before that happens, we have to drive to the store. You can see how those things kind of work backward from, hey, we leave our garage back here. We go from our garage to the driving, we're in the store, we put the eggs in our basket, we buy them, we leave the store, we blow them in our car, and then we drive home. That is what I think about when it comes to process design. Now, that could be super complicated. It's simple. We're going and getting eggs, but now I've got a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8-step process that I'm going through to do this. Here's the thing. If you apply this thinking inside your organization, what you might realize is I don't have to document all of this stuff. The only way that you can simplify it, though, is to first start documenting it. First, pull the people together and start getting everything up on the board around how you're thinking about design from, and we've talked about this before, from an internal customer perspective and an external customer perspective, so your employees, then the people who pay you. We've talked about it relative to onboarding people onto a team and onboarding new customers into a group. And we've talked about it in the context of software design. Like, how do we set up for a specific experience? This is all design. We can let that just happen organically and hope that we'll achieve a result, or we can design for success. And that's what I want to help you see over the course of the next couple of minutes here in this applying design from a leadership perspective. So what are some of the key components we need to know in order to design properly? First, we need to know what our start is. We need to know what our starting point is. Second thing we need to know is what's our end point. I'm a bigger fan of starting with the end in mind and beginning with that end point. Some people prefer to start with a starting point. You just need to know both of them. So we know what A is right here, and we know what Z is right here. So now we start to break that down into bigger parts. What are the key milestones between the starting point and the end point to determine whether or not we're making progress? You've done this before on a road trip. If you're driving from Phoenix out to Orlando and you find yourself in Blythe, you're in the wrong place. Things are working out wrong. Just take a look at a map and that'll all become pretty clear. We know what our starting point is. We know what our end point is. And then we have these key waypoints, these key areas in the middle. If we were doing this in Visio, if we were going to do some design pieces here, we might actually turn those into triangles because that's where we're going to make a decision. Do we continue to move forward or do we turn around? So let's use those as triangles. So we have squares, which are part of the process. We have a beginning point right back here, and then we have these decision points in the middle. The more points that you add in, the greater complexity there is. The more points that you add in, the greater the risk is that you don't actually convert at each of these individual stages. Again, this is tough stuff, and it's really hard to do it on your own, especially if you've got this deep institutional knowledge. What'll end up happening is you'll skip some steps in laying out the process. And if you skip steps, you're going to create risk. So first, we do our start point, our end point, and then our waypoints. Once we have those things laid out, then we've got to decide which way do we want to build. My recommendation is build backward from success. The reason why I like to build backward from success is because it typically is easier for people to remember what happens just before Z, what happens just before X, what happens just before T. Work backward. If you start at the beginning and try to work forward, the risk is that you could go in multiple directions. You could find yourself moving in all of these different branching scenarios, like, hey, well, what if so-and-so does this? Or what if they have that kind of background? So my recommendation is work backward. We know what our end point is, we know what our start point is, and we know what our bigger waypoints are. Once we've got that down on paper, then I ask you to take a look at this and say, what did we miss? What are some key pieces that we missed? What are some key pieces that everyone doesn't have to go through? If everyone doesn't have to go through them, why do we need to have them in there? Are they actually part of the process? The key with processes, my expectation is if I work the process, the next thing is going to happen. If I work the process properly, it will lead to a specific result. If it doesn't lead to a specific result, then I've got a problem. If the process is not working, meaning we're not getting the results that we expect out of the process, one of two things has happened. I either didn't do the work, or the people aren't doing the work, or the process is not right. The process is broken. In either of those instances, you can assess, did we do what we said we were going to do here? If yes, good. If it didn't get to the handoff, then why did it not get to the handoff, and do we need to add in an extra step? Design for success. Now, everybody doesn't need to know that you've designed for this. This is where I like to get into, from a leadership perspective, design serendipity. You can do this in a way where you lay out the right stepping stones, but it doesn't feel overly rigorous and process generated and so rigid. Create space, if you understand where these waypoints are, for the team to be flexible in the way that they work. So in design, we think about each of the individual process points. We think about where we are, where we need to go, the stuff in between. Another key thing that I think a lot of people miss when it comes to process is the process linear like this? It should. All processes should have some order of operations. Does the process loop back? Meaning, if I get into the car and I get to the grocery store and I realize that I don't have money, then I have to go back home to the beginning point and then start each of those processes, each of those components of the process again. The easiest way that I've found to help people think about this is in the context of board games. If we're playing Game of Life, which kind of looks like customer journey, we kind of meander around throughout the piece. If we're working on something like, meaning we don't ever really lose things. We don't give things back. We meander through. If we're thinking about something like sales process for forecasting, then I suggest something like Chutes and Ladders, where you can loop back to the beginning, but then you have to go through each of those pieces. Now, the thing that's interesting about Chutes and Ladders is you don't have to always go back to the beginning piece. You can just go back to the stage before. That's a looping process within the process. Now, here's another type of linear process that loops. The most famous one around this is John Boyd's OODA loop. Observe, orient, decide, act, and then come back around. Observe, orient, decide, act. Now, he would draw that up as a circle, and this isn't a closed loop because now you're re-observing things based on the things that you've taken in. Know what type of process you're building, know what the variables are, and then lay things out so that it can be as simple as possible, complex as necessary. Your objective in each of these is that you convert to the next step, and you just make it so clean, so that if you do all of the work in this step, the next thing is likely true. If you design your processes effectively, your systems will work better inside your organization. And if you think about systems are a combination of multiple processes, tools, and people. That's the overall system. This is where stuff can get really complex, but I'll save that for another day. If you'd like some help inside your organization or with you one-on-one, know this is the kind of stuff I do in one-on-one coaching and the guided whiteboard sessions. Happy to work with you. If you know somebody else who could use some help with this, please share this with them. Thanks.